Hello everyone and welcome to another amazing, incredible quick pass review. Now, some people may accuse me of not exactly being up to date with the times, but what can be better, I say, than going back about 30 years and looking at an old White Dwarf. This is White Dwarf issue number 109, and issue 109 it's a little bit special to me because of the nostalgia value. I haven't just plucked 109 out at complete random. There is a bit of a reason for this on a personal level. This was the first White Dwarf that I ever bought, or more accurately, was the first White Dwarf that my sister ever bought and gave to me after she was done reading it. And the reason for this is I grew up in quite a small town, and my sister was really into Dungeons and Dragons, and she would buy Dragon magazine every month, and if they didn't have a Dragon magazine she would buy a White Dwarf instead. And so that's basically my story of how I got into gaming. It was all my big sister's fault. So when I say this was the first issue that I ever got, not this exact one, I got this off of eBay about a year ago now. Again, just because of the nostalgia reasons of wanting to take a look at it. None of my old White Dwarfs unfortunately survived the great culling of 1998, when I decided that I wanted to catalogue all of my White Dwarfs by taking them apart and putting them in a binder and then losing the binder. So yeah, all my actual old White Dwarfs have disappeared in the veils of time, and so some of the amazing early ones that I really loved, I've gone back onto eBay. I can't exactly remember how much this was. I'll have to find out and maybe put it up at the end of this video. But it was only a few quid, so it wasn't very expensive. And there are plenty knocking around. I do highly encourage everyone, just go and buy a couple of the old ones, because the artwork, the imagery as we're about to see with these ones, are just absolutely fantastic. And that's what we will get into now. So, because I want to keep this in good condition, we have popped it into a wrapper. It's maybe a bit over the top considering you can still get these quite easily, but I think it's nice to try and preserve some of this old stuff. And then it's got a bit of cardboard in the back as well, just to stop it from bending. So here we go, and let's start with the artwork. Now, Games Workshop definitely had a good style about them, even back when this issue was made. And let me just double check to get it right. This is January 1989, so I would have been 9 years old at the time of getting this. And so the style's quite different to modern White Dwarfs, in the sense that I think what Games Workshop realised in the 90s is that super saturated colours just sell really well. If you look at their marine designs especially, they use lots of very iridescent, fluorescent, super saturated type colours. Look at the ultramarine blue, it's a very rich, deep, gorgeous blue. Imperial fists, salamanders, white scars, these are all, you know, very vivid, very colourful schemes, and in the way that they paint the miniatures as well, not just the artwork. We see that they're super saturated, and that's basically continued across all of their line. One of the reasons why people are quite nostalgic for the old Hammer stuff is because it has quite a different style. It's far more organic, much dirtier. In fact, the camera here is actually doing a little bit too good of a job of picking up the colours. From what I can see in the preview screen, the blue of these fortresses is actually far more muted than the camera is picking up. So even the camera is trying to saturate this up a bit. And well, hopefully that will make some of the other pictures kind of look maybe a bit more modern as well. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this particular piece of artwork relative to some of the other White Dwarfs that I have, but I really like the style of, you know, you've got your kind of your central hero. I think the people drawing this were not quite top tier in the way that they are now, or the way that they even evolved to be a few years later. I think this leg looks, you know, this is a bit short here. This whole pose looks a little bit gangly. Not quite sure exactly what he's stood on there in terms of like the angle that it's at and the depth perception. So it's not 100% by modern standards, but the composition I think is fantastic. You've got all of these zombies being kicked and hacked away. Not sure what this little dude down in the corner is doing. He's just having a jolly good time of it. I'm not sure why the zombies aren't after him. He looks much easier to catch than this armoured, axed up dude in the middle is. But even then you can see that the choice of colours, you've got the red and the yellow against the kind of the more organic backgrounds. He really stands out. So yeah, I think the artwork is really good here. And then on the back we have an iconic diorama, The Siege by Ivan Bartley. This has quite a high prestigious place in Oldhammer lore. Now, I wouldn't say that it was top tier compared to things like, you know, the Necromunda building, like with the High Spire, things like that they've done, but it's definitely really strong. And one of the things I like about the compositions that they did here is that they were allowed to sort of devote a whole page to it. It wasn't just some small bit kind of crammed into a corner. And because it has the whole page, it gets to explore the detail far more. So most obviously we've got some vertical storylining going on, that we have, you know, on the battlements here we've got one set of fights going on, and then right down the bottom we have some dwarves trying to dig and mine their way out, fairly oblivious to some of the problems that are going on above them. So yeah, you can see from the painting as well, it's definitely got that older style. Again, not as super saturated as some modern ones, but pretty colourful still, which I think is helped by some of the humans in the picture. The dwarves are a little bit more muted. And I think one of the races that has changed the most back from the early 90s and late 80s is the orcs. They've definitely gone away from a sort of a more organic, horrid look to a more cartoony, jovial type style. You know, here we go, lads, lads, lads. As opposed to here where they look a bit more brutal, a bit more Lord of the Rings, isn't it, really, overall? But yeah, this is one of my favourite sieges. And of course, when you're 9-10 years old and you don't really own sort of miniatures like this can be really inspiring for the imagination. Certainly this particular composition did end up its way in a 9-year-old's homebrew D&D adventure back when I used to play that. So taking a look inside, what have we got to get through? So how things come around. Adeptus Titanicus is pretty big now. I guess it was a little bit bigger at the end of last summer when, you know, there was hype around it. The hype's died down a little bit now, although we're still getting new models out with things like the Acastus Knight that was recently released. And we're definitely hoping to see a few more weapon options appear for the other Titans. Here we have epic battles between gigantic robots. Well, they're not really robots anymore. I wonder if that's just some way of explaining it to people. But let's have a little bit of a close-up as to what you get in the box. So you get some range rulers, you get some pretty funky looking Titans. Don't think they'd quite get away with this these days. These definitely look quite clunky and kind of just bits hung on. Loads of little cards, template parts, and then some terrain as well to help provide some cover. And we can see from the contents, 6 clipped together Warlord class Titan models, so 6 Titans in a box. Yeah, not sure you can get that these days. over to the contents. So we won't really sort of focus on this because we'll just see it as we go through. Here they are, some of the beautiful beasts that were part of all of it. Brian Ansell, John Blanche, Jervis Johnson, Dave Pringle, Mike Brunton and Bill. Oh, good old Bill. It's probably the only lineup of pictures where Jervis isn't the weirdest looking guy. And Brian Ansell in particular is rocking an 80s haircut. So yeah, if you wonder where the production crew for Stranger Things got their ideas for how to style hair in the 80s, it's definitely from Brian, I think. Lots of independent stockists, so you always got a page of, you know, games. White Dwarfs have always been a catalogue book, right? So it's important to sell the product, and therefore you need to make sure people know where you can buy it. So in addition to the actual Games Workshop, it also lists some of the independent stockists that would have it. There we go, with a news page, so talking about the Warhammer Championships 1988. So even back then there were championships. The competitors were fighting for the Great Warhammer itself, manufactured specially for the championships by Raven Fantasy Armory. The 20 players commanded forces chosen from the lists in Warhammer armies. There were usual dwarves, elves and dark elves, plus a Skaven army fielded by Pete Wooding, partner in the notorious Orc's Nest shop. There was even one force which simply consisted of 6 models mounted on flying dragons. Now, I wonder what you would call a player that turned up to an Age of Sigmar game with 6 dragons. Probably cheating, considering that you need some battle line stuff now, but there we go. On we are. So, I don't know if you guys, who are maybe a little bit older like myself, remember these things. They were adventure games that you would play over your telephone. So you would call this premium, I don't know why we ever did this. You call this premium rate hotline, and it would be like a choose your own adventure book. So yeah, it would be like Fighting Fantasy or the Lone Wolf series, except instead of having a book and turning to page numbers, you would call up, you would hear, you decide what to do, and then you'd use the buttons on your phone on the touch tone to decide what to do next. At an extortionate rate, you could probably buy 10 books for the cost of playing even about 20 minutes on one of these. Calls charged at 25 pence per minute on a cheap rate. You know, this was back when a White Dwarf would cost £1.50. So yeah, about probably £1 a minute by today's rates. Not sure anyone would be paying that. Talk about microtransactions. Used to be worse. But good advert, right? Nice big spider. That's going to freak you out. Quill dripping with blood that has come from this skeleton head. What's not to like? And you didn't really need your parrot's permission either, did you? You just phoned the number up. Couldn't stop you. Lots of other adverts. Didn't really say Games Workshop doing too much of that now, do you? And yeah, 2 more adverts. Here we have first edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, softback edition available soon. That's actually the version I've got. Is a softback one. And then another advert for Adeptus Titanicus featuring this fantastic diorama. And now we have rules for vehicles in Adeptus Titanicus. So that's something that's actually quite topical today. Here we are, 30 and a bit years later, and people are saying, well, hang on, these Titans and Knights are all well and good. When are we going to get Land Raiders? When are we going to get super heavy tanks? When can I recreate the Space Marine and Epic 40k and Armageddon battles that I remember? But it's easy to forget that when Adeptus Titanicus first launched, it was just Titans as well. And here we have some Land Raiders, some old style Land Raiders, and some little Space Marines as well, and some Rhinos. So here we go. Here's the rules for a Land Raider. What do we have here? So we got the vehicle data cards. We have firing arcs. So we've got the side weapons with a 180 and the front weapons has got a 90 degrees. So here we've got codes and lots of fire arcs. So, you know, good level of detail going on there. And a nice explanation for everything that's going to come later. And this story is actually really good. They should republish this story, actually, I think. Unless they've done it already and I've completely missed it. This is actually, it's a really good way of understanding what it was like to be, you know, up against these massive war machines. And basically it's just a story of a crewman in a Land Raider shooting away at some Titans. And is that Land Raider he's in? Yeah, it's Land Raider that he's in. I don't think some of the super heavy Imperial Guard vehicles actually existed at this point. I think it was a few years later that they were invented. And then here is one of, this is tier 1 diorama time. This is iconic and was for many years. Here we see some Titans with the Land Raiders like fighting amongst all of this this industrial hive world. All of this terrain was scratch built. So as the caption here informs us, this was Tony Cottrell's extensive collection of epic scale scenery scratch built using plasticard, various plastic tubs and cartons, desk tidies, ping pong balls and innumerable remnants from old plastic toys and kits. And what a great battlefield that is for the diorama. And one thing I really like as well, because this was in the days before people like really did bases. If you're going to like, as in when you based a miniature, it would probably just be painted green and just left maybe a little bit of flock if you're feeling advanced. So one thing I really like about this diorama is all the bases have actually just been covered under the sand, and so you get a much nicer impression of the vehicles. In particular, one thing that's important, it'll be interesting to see if they do bring vehicles into modern day Adeptus Titanicus, how they deal with the fact that if your Titans are on bases and your vehicles are not, that looks weird, because the bases at this scale are actually quite sizable. So, you know, if you're dropping down to, you know, it'll be somewhere between 6 and 8 mil scale, if these Titans are on bases which are 3-4 millimeters deep, that's a credible portion of what these vehicles will be. But then, are we going to see these vehicles on individual bases? Maybe, maybe not. I think I probably would mount them on even if they don't come with them. So it'll be interesting to see what they decide to do. Yeah, love this diorama, absolutely love it. And yeah, here we have some rules for vehicle detachments, talking about legality of formations, so effectively coherence distances and giving them orders. So again, very similar to modern day Adeptus Titanicus in the sense that you give the units orders and then they act on those orders. Then we've got rules around the movement phase, different types of attacks, stomp and ram attacks, Titans going up and just trying to crush a Land Raider underfoot. And then we get a repair phase. So again, not a million miles away from the rules we've got now. So yeah, glad to see that they took some inspiration from some of the old stuff. And yeah, just think, this is the book. This is how those vehicle rules first got into the public awareness for the hobbyists that played Adeptus Titanicus back then. I was still playing entirely Warhammer Fantasy Battle. I wasn't even playing much 40k in '89. It was just before 2nd edition came out that I got into 40k, mainly because none of my friends really played Warhammer Fantasy Battle, just my brother, and I was really tired of Dan Hell's Vance Macabre and the Hand of Gork just being pushed into my Silver Helms. Not that I'm still bitter 30 years later. So there we go, there's the first part with the Titans. Now let's move on to the realm of chaos. I think one thing it's safe to say about the older stuff to do with chaos is they didn't really worry about it being particularly kid friendly in the way that they do now. There's definitely a lot more, well, it's less cartoony than these days. And so this is The Lost and the Damned. This would have been about when the Lost and the Damned book came out. No doubt in a future quick pass review, it won't be quick, we'll be looking at some of the Realm of Chaos books, Slaves to Darkness and The Lost and the Damned. And this looks like it's basically an advert for what The Lost and the Damned will be, but with some of the greater demons kind of fleshed out. And one thing we see here is that everything is displayed both in terms of Warhammer Fantasy Battle and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So if we take a bit of a dig in, I mean, that's some crazy artwork. The neck's probably a bit long by modern style, and I don't know whether these are intended to be on the same scale, but certainly the Greater Demon of Nurgle has grown relative to the other Greater Demons, which I think is right. I think that works. Compared to, he used to be sort of about the same size, basically just a big fat snotling, whereas now he's a bit more in his modern version of Papa Nurgle. But anyway, going back to the Lord of Change, we see that he has two profiles, one for Warhammer Fantasy Battle and one for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So yeah, that's pretty boss, isn't it? Weapon skill of 10, which is the most you could have in Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And then a weapon skill of 90, so that's a 90% hit chance on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. But of course, in addition to the basic stat line, we had lots of abilities, and then in the Realm of Chaos books, they could also pick up additional favours. And well, not just favours actually, sometimes they were bad, sometimes they were penalties. It all depends what you rolled, very chaotic. So the reason why we only see two here is that Slaves to Darkness already had Slaanesh and Khorne in it, and so The Lost and the Damned was basically just focusing on Tzeentch and Nurgle. Some advert for Marauder Miniatures and Total Fantasy. So yeah, lots of other companies getting their adverts into White Dwarf as well. If I remember rightly, they did print. They used to print a circulation number on White Dwarfs. Let's see if I can find that. No, I think that must have come in later. I can't see it. If you can see it, do comment below. But imagine that these adverts actually made this magazine viable in the early stages. It's probably the only way that it could help cover the production costs, because, you know, at £1.50 back then, that was actually a fair chunk. You know, you didn't just go around spending £1 willy-nilly. Not made of money. And then yeah, on to some Blood Bowl, Goblin Fanatics. So yeah, this is where Goblin Fanatics came in, Pogo Sticks of Doom as well. So that's the Pogoers. It's just amazing to think that so many of the original rules weren't found in rulebooks at all. They're all found in White Dwarf. So yeah, it was definitely something that you needed to pick up every single month to get access to all of them. And Fanatics back in here weren't just the ball and chain fanatics. It was basically any sort of crazy goblin player, and in this case a goblin fanatic that would jump up and down over people with their pogo sticks. Terminators, look at this beauty. That is genuinely what the sculpts of the old Terminators look like. Pretty trash by modern standards. You had to start somewhere though. There is I think a little bit of nostalgia. One of the things actually that I really like Games Workshop having done is when they made some of this old stuff. They didn't just kind of trash it immediately in the lore, it still had a bit of a place. And so lots of the old sculpts of things like power armor have just basically been consigned to the history of that's what the 40k universe was like back then, not just what Games Workshop and the models you could buy were like back then. And there are a few nods as well, like with the land speeder, which you can see in 30k, that they actually pick up that for some of the older stuff as well. So lots of rules for Terminator armor, 2+ save. And you can customize them quite a lot as well. Bioscanners for 5 points. Bargain. Absolute bargain. Gobbledygook. Honestly, showing you this gobbledygook thing, I have no idea whether I would actually get in trouble for some sort of IP infringement. I'm hoping that because it's 30 years old, no one's going to like say, shouldn't be doing that, Tackle Zone. But there we go. Basically, it's a story of a goblin fighting his own snot. There you go, lovely. Would you get away with that these days? I hope so. I hope so. And then on to, I think my favourite part of this whole book, the Imperial Guard. So this would have been back around when the Imperial Guard plastic box set was being first released. And it's really interesting to see how much love the RTB01 Marines get. But I think it's the RTB08 Imperial Guard don't really get a huge amount of love. And it's one of the things that I'm so annoyed that I lost. And I had it as well up until about 8 years ago that I lost them. Some original plastic Imperial Guard. I had 3 10-man tactical squads and some heavy weapon squads, all in the colour of the Imperial Guardsmen that we are going to see in this. So, just got some good flavour text about the Imperial Guard. So, this White Dwarf here is basically as close to a army book, as close to a codex that first edition got. You know, this introduction, the explanation of how the structures were built, and then as we'll see shortly, an army list. This was how you basically got your Imperial Guard codex. So lots of good information. So even back here you talk about how the Adeptus Mechanicus worked with them a lot, talk about sanctioned psychers, Commissars, Rough Riders, they all came in. And this here is just one of the most iconic pieces of artwork that Games Workshop have ever done. It's hard not to review an old White Dwarf, especially considering I'm hugely biased with nostalgia and not use the word iconic about 78 million times. This was some of the information, some of the styling that really got everything going. So that would have inspired the miniature sculptors, who then went on to make these models and later ones as well, and would have just really helped set the scene for this faction and the 40k universe overall. Approved abhumans. So, want some beastmen in your Imperial Guard? Yeah, you can have that. They've kind of fallen out of favour a bit, although really interesting to see with Necromunda that they have come back. That you have that kind of nod to the old lore with some of the bounty hunters, as well as the Ratling and Ogrins, and yeah, them too. So information about the coherency, more information about the Adeptus Mechanicus and some of the equipment that they used. And here are some rules for the penal legions, including the bomb harnesses that they wore. And yeah, just more information There's some more really good artwork. Imperial Guard with jump packs. Very much mirroring the other Space Marines in terms of what they had available to them, and some support weapons. And then we move here into force composition. So, what do we have here? So, as expected, we've got commanders and captains and lieutenants, so these are the leadership. But one of the things that's kind of interesting is these options are a bit flatter today, and I don't know whether it's because Games Workshop want to tie it to specific models, but as you can see, back when you had your commanders, you could choose whether you wanted them to just be a kind of a low-level champion commander, or whether you wanted it to be a major hero. So there was a huge range within even your leader characters as to just how good you wanted them to be. Here are the lieutenants as well, with all of their options included. Commissars, truly frightening figures. So players must roll to determine how many commissars are present in the force. If available, commissars must be included, but at no points cost. You wouldn't get away with that in this modern tournament standard of gaming, would you? Just turning up to, imagine turning up to the final of a grand tournament and rolling that you just got 4 commissars for free. Rock on. And then we have sanctioned psychers, tactical squads, support squads. Let's make that a bit bigger. Assault squads, and then command section, and then lots of additional equipment that you can choose to buy them. So assault platoons could have jump packs. You could equip them with horses to turn them into rough riders, with your choice of explosive lance if you needed it or not. And yeah, they could also take some pretty good vehicles. And then finishing off with some of the more stranger auxiliary type options, we have Beastmen attack squads, Rattling marksman squads, so they're exactly the same. So if you wonder why you get basically halfling snipers in modern day Imperial Guard forces, White Dwarf 109 is the reason. Penal battalion squads, Ogren squads, and then yeah, some hero bombs. Lots of equipment profiles. You can take robots as well. So Castellan robots, Cataphract robots. These are where all the robots came in. So you would add these to your Adeptus Mechanicus guys. They would be controlling them. And there we go. Yeah, so you basically got an Imperial Guard codex, like a mini codex, in the book. Now, just wanted to go back to these. The Spiders, also known as the Necromundan, 5th Arcadian Regiment. So we can see that the symbol of the cult of the spider in this Hive World Arcadia. So all of my guys were painted up in this kind of Arcadian pattern, with some sort of tiger stripe camo, urban camo. I think this is a sign of the 80s as well. Just how, just exactly what that trouser line is doing, not quite sure. But again, you see colour coordination for these squads. So yeah, that would be quite a nod to the past if you're making a modern Imperial Guard army and then you used these colour coordination. Yeah, that would be quite nice. You could see here that you'd have your company number, but then you'd have also your platoon designated by number of colours as well. There we go, moving on. Not too much to do now. Let's have a look at some of this artwork. So I think it's hard to overstate the importance of this artwork for getting an understanding of the theming of a lot of the fantasy and 40k background. You know, this is a time quite a few years before pretty much anyone had the internet. I think it's probably about 5 years before my family had, like, my parents have always been kind of, they were sort of early adopters of technology. So it was pretty unusual for anyone to even have the internet sort of back around 1993, 94. And certainly in the UK, in the southwest of the UK. So things like this really made a difference. This information, you couldn't just go to a fandom website, you couldn't just go to Wikipedia or you know, one of the other many sources of information that you have now. This did not exist. If you wanted to understand this universe, you either bought a rule book or you bought White Dwarf and looked at these pictures. Those were basically your only two options. And there's a real kind of joy to a lot of this black and white artwork. People still really love it, and rightly so. There's lots of stories being told, and I think partly it was because although it was grimdark even back at this time, it had a bit of a sense of humour with it that's maybe a little bit lost in modern 40k especially. Maybe 40k takes itself a little bit too seriously in its main lines, whereas back here it was a bit more, I think it's a very British reaction to be sort of face the worst and still have a bit of a gallows sense of humour. So here we have some people basically working themselves to death on what looks like a head of a titan there. Lots of repair work that is going on. Some more mail order. So yeah, here we go. Here's the Imperial Guard box set. 36 plastic guardsmen for $9.99. So again, that's probably around 30, 35, 40 pounds by modern money. So actually, you know, it's not done too badly. Adeptus Titanicus, 25 pounds. Slaves to Darkness book, 14.99. Lost to the Damned, also 14.99. You're going to be paying about 10 times that much now if you want an authentic one. Games Workshop have re-released this, so they can be found. I think it's just from Warhammer World HQ for much cheaper. I really hope that they do these as well. Some people, I think, who have the originals, like me, who have paid, you know, quite a few figures to get them off of eBay, feel maybe a little bit put out that they spent a lot relative to what you can buy this for now, cheaper. But I really like that they're redoing it. I think the more people, the more hobbyists who have access to all the wonderful information that is contained in these books, the better. I think it's important to share that around. If only because some of the, let's say, more opinionated people on some of the lore channels, yeah, they could do with learning a thing or two, I think. Here we have some Orcs and Goblins. Those are some of the Imperial Guards itself. That came from the box set. And lots of adverts. Orc's Nest, still going. Still going. Maybe I'll take a picture of that and send it to them. I won't because I'm lazy, but you know, it's a nice idea. And some heavy metal. I think it's fair to say that although these miniatures are very well painted, and although they were definitely cutting edge for the day, by modern standards, well, they're a lot better. However, some of the conversions, I'm looking at you, are a little bit sickening in my opinion. There we go. I mean, honestly, what is that? Oh, it's horrific. So yeah, kind of just staring at it now, just mesmerised me. And yeah, here's talk about curse conversions. Never throw anything away. Very good advice. Everyone should build up their bits box. You never know when something that you didn't really want 8 years ago is the exact thing that you want now. And there we go. Conversion 2. Another creature featured in Realm of Chaos but not yet available from Citadel. A Chaos Spawn can be great fun to create, and it can be horrific to create as well. That is straight from the Imaginarium of John Blanche. May you never change. And then they've just stuck some more Titanica stuff at the end. Warhound class Scout Titans. Yeah, so, you know, forget all the vehicle stuff that you got back here. Yeah, no, that wouldn't be a sensible place to put it. Let's stick it right at the end. End as you mean to start. With some profile cards and some fantastic pictures of more Titans. Yeah, fantastic. So there we go, guys. That was White Dwarf 109. Definitely one of the harmonies of my childhood. I think it's fair to say that I didn't fully appreciate this when, for quite a few years actually, after it came out. Partly because I was kind of more into D&D back then, so it was kind of a bit annoying not to get a Dragon magazine, which were also very good. But I think as I kind of got into my early teens and became more interested in 40k, especially on top of the Warhammer Fantasy Battle, it was great having a few of these older books. I think I regularly started collecting from about 158, maybe 148. It was Empire versus, should remember this, the book's just in the other room. It was the one with Jervis Johnson's Orcs against Andy Chambers, Empire, Azhag the Slaughterer, Crown of Command, Honor Wyvern. People who are around will know the one I mean. That's probably when I started to regularly collect them for myself. But we had 5 or 6 of these older ones still kicking around. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed a little revisit to the past. Next week, we're going to be jumping straight into the future with Warcry, which is a game that I've been looking forward to reviewing for a long time. I got the pre-order. It is on its way. Should hopefully arrive this weekend, although I'm going to be up at the Old Hammer convention. So hopefully I'll be able to pick it up from the post office Monday morning, and then review it Monday evening and get up sometime next week. So please do join me then. Look forward to seeing you, and until then, take care of yourselves.